So, welcome to Informed Choice Radio. We're going to try a bit of a new format today, and I'm very pleased to welcome Hannah Godfrey to the podcast. I'll get Hannah to introduce herself in just a second, but essentially, what we're hoping to do is take a look at some of the more topical things going on in the world of personal finance. We're not afraid to tackle the big subjects, but really, the purpose of this is to take a real life look at what's going on out there, and hopefully, in a slightly light-hearted, more approachable way than you come across your personal finance news normally. But let's start with an introduction. Hopefully listeners and viewers know who I am by now after 500 plus episodes. But Hannah, who on earth are you? Tell us about you.
Well, hi everybody. Thank you so much for having me, Martin. Hopefully this is going to be fantastic. So my name is Hannah. If you are a financial advisor, you may know me from Professional Advisor. That was the publication I used to write for, where I was a personal finance journalist. I have now flown the nest. I now work at City AM, where I write mainly about professional services. So that's audit stuff, legal stuff, insurance, all that fun stuff, but also general business, odd bit of politics, market stuff. So that's me.
That's you in a nutshell. And we're very lucky to have you here, I think. And hopefully, your view of the world when it comes to personal finance and economics and things will be slightly different to mine. And by way of example, let's start with our first story this week. And you're a London lady, so you hopefully will have a unique insight into this, or at least a London perspective on it. And this is London Mayor Sadiq Khan, who is saying that there's a threat to central London as commuters are embracing the suburbs. So he's talking about an existential threat to central London. He thinks that it's likely that many office workers are never going to return to the capital. Now, you're working in the capital right now, aren't you? And living in the capital too. So tell us, what do you think of that sort of worry from Sadiq Khan?
I really go back and forth with this. I see entirely where he's coming from, and I share some of his worries. But on the other hand, I disagree with him, and I think that this might not necessarily be about threat, but about how we can adapt and we can change and we can actually make something new and better come from what none of us expected and none of us planned for and none of us have enjoyed. Let's be honest. Because this was an interview that he was done in the Observer. And he says that, yes, absolutely, he's worried that not many people are going to be coming back to central London. They have surveyed a load of different people, and for a myriad of reasons, people actually don't particularly want to come back and commute into the city every day. Almost immediately after that, though, he says that central London is going to remain this huge draw because of its technology and its culture and its museums and its arts and its galleries and so on, which I do think somewhat undermines his first point, but we can move on. My big theory about this is that I think the move to home working was very inevitable. Where I think clearly this has happened way faster than we thought. To my mind, this was going to be the sort of thing that happened in the next decade, the next 2 decades. We have the technology is consistently getting better. We can work from home really efficiently. We can save money, all this good stuff. The problem is that it's happened too fast. And so businesses, particularly businesses like your Pretz, your Cafe Neros, your Starbucks, Itsu, Wasabi, anything you can think of that can sell a coffee or maybe sell a commuter, a cheese and ham toasty for lunch or something like that, they have simply not had time to adapt to this change. And so where perhaps, of course, businesses look at data and business goes where it can earn money, and they just haven't had the chance to maybe move out to suburbs or places that aren't central London that actually could maybe use some investment. So that could actually be good for places like that, but they just haven't had the time to get there. And so the major threat is that those people are going to lose their jobs, which is heartbreaking for them and awful. And that's clearly a terrible outcome.
I mean, as you say, this all happened very quickly. And I think like many elements of the pandemic, the pandemic served as a bit of a catalyst for change. It's change that was already happening. And, as an employer myself, we were seeing requests for flexible working, remote working. And then all of a sudden back in March, we were having to say to everyone, yep, that's it now. You're all remote workers. And we've not actually come back. We probably won't come back until, I don't know, if I had to guess, I'd say next summer at the earliest. But interestingly, we've proven that remote working works for what we do, at least. And I accept in different professions, different sectors. If you make sandwiches for Pret, you can't work from home. You have to be in the building to do that. But it's having quite an interesting impact, I think. This change in working style, this acceleration of remote working, and we saw, I think, at the end of last week, official figures on house prices. So house prices in the southwest of England going up by 6.4% in the year to September, but the UK average was only 4.7%. So all of a sudden, everybody wanting to live in parts of the country that perhaps a little bit more attractive, a bit nicer, a bit more comfortable than living in expensive central London or in other city centres. So do you think that's a trend that might continue if people realise they can work anywhere? Why would you live in central London? I don't know. God, I'm asking you. Why would you keep living in central London and not move somewhere pretty?
Well, that's the killer question, isn't it? And I can tell you that I just know, even from my friends, that several people have moved out. And absolutely, there is very good reason why you wouldn't live in London if you didn't have to live in London.
Mm,
There is, of course, great reason to live in London. Obviously, a lot of us have built our lives here, particularly those among us that are a bit younger. We haven't got kids yet, and so it really would mean uprooting everything. So I don't think there's going to be this exodus necessarily. Um, and being that, house prices are going up everywhere else, I think I read the same research, and I think house prices in London still rose last year, but I think it was by 4%, or
mm,
it was just over 4%, where the UK average was 4.7%, which may mean for younger people that actually housing is slightly more affordable in London, because at the moment, we all just laugh with each other about the idea of getting on the housing ladder in London. It's just sort of this silly fictitious idea that's just never going to happen. Maybe that means it could happen, but the irony, of course, being that we might not want to after all that. So we'll have to see.
Sorry, I don't mean to laugh. As a property owner in Surrey, it's not much better down here, I've got to say. And yeah, I think we've got some interesting times ahead in terms of property prices, and almost a rebalancing potentially of property prices across the UK. The other factor, and a client of mine said this to me a few months back, which is, as soon as you get widespread autonomous self-driving cars, you could live anywhere in the country, because your commute all of a sudden becomes climbing into the back seat of your car in the morning, pressing a button on the GPS, and it drives you to work. You've got your own personal train line, and that could flatten out house prices, level house prices across the UK as well. I was targeted this afternoon by a Facebook ad saying, if you can work anywhere, why don't you move to Jersey? And the Jersey Tourist Board are, and I've seen similar in the past from Portugal as well, are now targeting people and saying, so it's not just about where to live in the UK. Yeah, if you're a remote worker, as long as you're in approximately the right time zone, and as long as you tell your boss first, I guess you get in a bit of trouble if you suddenly call in and say, well, I'm in Portugal now. Yeah,
Yeah, I can't actually
stuff
pop
like
in for that 10 o'clock meeting. I'm a 3 hour flight away. But no, there was something quite brilliant now I think about it. It was, I think it was Barbados that were offering people money to come and just work on the island of Barbados, because the theory, of course, was that they would bring in all sorts of money just by existing and living and paying rent and going and, to the shops, whatever. And my old boss and I were talking about how great that would be, actually. But yeah, that you run into time zone issues at that point. So
yeah, there's
maybe.
probably sort of a segment of the world where you could probably just about get away with it, but if you end up on some island in the Pacific somewhere, there might be issues. They might realize you're sort of working at 2 a.m. in the morning, and yeah, things have gone wrong. So that's our first news item this week, Hannah. The second one I wanted to look at was this report in Reuters, which found that UK consumer morale has sunk to a 6-month low in November. So it's a survey from GfK, and it's saying that the second lockdown correlated with a surge in pessimism. So we all became far more miserable when that lockdown started. They have a consumer confidence index, and it was reading minus 33 in November, down from minus 31 in October. So are you feeling pessimistic as a consumer?
No, actually, not in the slightest. I mean, I very rarely feel optimistic as a consumer. Again, because I'm a young journalist in London, I just accept that everything's terrible all the time. So I wouldn't say I'm even feeling any less optimistic than I have been recently. But actually, this pandemic, as I'm sure for many people that work in offices, has allowed me to save money.
Mhm.
And so actually, I have more spending power than I would have done this time a year ago, which is a weird outcome from the pandemic.
And part of their research as well looked at a measure of personal finances, and they found that that measure was the lowest since December 2013. I can't think back that far to think what was going on in the end of 2013 that made our personal finances that bad, or at least us feel so pessimistic about our personal finances. But you're right in what you say, and I think it's a pandemic of two halves for a lot of people, isn't it? I mean, people who have kept their jobs, who are then forced to stay home, spending less money on eating out, going on holiday, entertainment, etc. They're probably in a much better financial position than they would have otherwise been. But of course, there's a swathe of people who have lost jobs or who have been placed on furlough and are on 80% of their salary, who are also in some cases being forced to continue going into work, possibly on reduced hours, reduced wages. So it's not all good for everyone.
No, absolutely not. And there's certain groups of society that have just been completely missed out. I mean, the self-employed, I have a friend that's self-employed and she's relatively new to being self-employed. I think she's only been self-employed for between 4 and 6 months. And she got not a single penny from the government because she was in some weird bracket where she hadn't been self-employed long enough and she wasn't earning enough money. And so nobody gave her anything. And she was
Mhm.
so unbelievably stressed. She would have exactly been one of those people who was totally pessimistic about her household income and her savings and whatnot, because she was having to dip into her savings for literally everything just to, buy a pint of milk, which is not a
Mm.
position anybody wants to be in. And I really fear things are going to get worse. I think the fact that we've got a vaccine now that seems to be effective, and is going to be rolled out from, well, maybe even the end of December, but
Mm.
definitely January. Um, I think hopefully we're now over the worst. I was, to be fair, when you asked me if I feel pessimistic, I guess I was looking at that quite selfishly because the entire time I'd sort of been sat there going, well, everything's all right for me, but I think a lot of people are going to lose their jobs.
Yeah.
So if we were thinking of wider pessimism, I was very, very concerned that we were going to end up with an enormous bill to pay, all of us, through taxes or through some kind of means, because all this has
Mm.
to be funded, of course. Um, Now I am more optimistic now there is news of a vaccine.
Yes, yeah. I mean, whilst it's going to take time, obviously, as you say, for that vaccine to start being rolled out and then for it to reach a tipping point, I guess, to get some sort of herd immunity in society. And there was a fantastic blog post I read on Friday from a wealth manager in the US who views right now as the halfway point in the pandemic. Sorry to be depressing, but looking back to March and assuming we get to some form of normality by June, right now, actually last Friday was the halfway point in this pandemic experience. And he was using that as a trigger to say to people, well, yeah, don't worry about what you haven't achieved. The fact you haven't written your novel, you haven't learned to speak French, etc. in the last 6 months. What are you going to do in the next sort of 7 or 8 months? And it's an opportunity whilst we're in this enforced isolation still, and we have a bit more time on our hands, maybe a bit more money available, that we can actually do something with it. And I think that was a great message. But yeah, interesting times ahead in all sorts of reasons, and consumer confidence, I guess, leads us nicely into our third topic, and that is we're speaking on Tuesday, but this will go out on Friday, which is Black Friday. Um, do you get excited about Black Friday? Is that just something other people get excited about?
No, I don't get excited about Black Friday at all. Consumers are expected to spend £750 million this year. And that's according to figures from Lloyds Bank that I read about half an hour ago. So they're
Yeah.
pretty up to date. Um, Personally, I have a real love-hate relationship with Black Friday. I'm not a big shopper. If I'm going to waste money, I'm going to waste it in the pub with my friends or on takeaway because I can't be bothered to cook for a particular evening. And neither of those are great ways to be spending money, I can admit. But where I am quite good is I will really ask myself if I need a product or I need a thing before I buy it. So, on the one hand, Black Friday can be great for me because I kind of know what I need because I actually need it and I would buy a certain thing at full price.
Mm.
But something like Black Friday, and I mean, bear in mind, it's not even just on Friday anymore, it lasts weeks, days, and Cyber Monday and all the rest of
Mm.
it. I can now simply get what I need for slightly less money. I'm going to buy some electric toothbrush heads this year, which is very exciting. It's such a boring thing to spend money on, though. And if I can save a fiver or something
I'm
like
about to say,
that,
well done you for sort of storing up that buying decision and waiting to get a bit of money off. And it was surprising to say the reason I wanted to talk about Black Friday was we've seen this research from which found that nearly 9 out of 10 products on Black Friday are either the same price or cheaper at some point during the year. So it's a bit of a scam, the whole thing, really, isn't it? It's not really. I mean, there's bargains out there. There's undoubtedly some bargains to be had, like your toothbrush heads, but yeah, most of this stuff we see where we see the sort of the countdown timer and we see the big percentage reductions. These are all psychological tricks, aren't they? Designed to get us to spend our money.
they are. That's absolutely the point I was going to make, and I think you can speak a lot better on this than I can. But it's all clever psychology. Retailers aren't giving away products for cheap out of the kindness of their heart. There's obviously a lot that goes into this, and ultimately Black Friday is about footfall. If shops were open, it would be about getting people in the shop, spending money, and actually making more money than they would if those products were at full price. In terms of online, which is how we'll be doing it in England, it's just about getting people to the website. And so we have to be mindful of that as consumers. And I think we really need to be asking ourselves, do I need this product? Would I pay for this at full price? Or am I just getting really excited because something that I think maybe I kind of like is 20% off? Because as well as the research points out, if you like it that much, the odds are it'll be 20% off at another time during the year anyway. So really there shouldn't be this pressure to buy everything on Black Friday. I think as far as a tip goes, I would really encourage people to do a lot of research before the day. I think something like a television is quite a popular thing to buy on Black Friday because it's obviously a fairly expensive purchase and they vary massively and quality varies massively. And so it does make sense to get it on discount as and when you can. I really decide exactly what television you want beforehand, because as well, the issue with things being such cheap prices sometimes is that you might end up with something that's really not very good quality. And if you haven't done your research, you could end up buying something, okay, it's a TV for £200, but it's a really terrible TV that you wouldn't want anyway. And so look at different retailers beforehand, look at different websites and figure out what is selling what for how much, and then you can get the absolute best deal on Black Friday and, you know, rig the system to go your way rather than allowing it to rinse you of money.
Yes, yeah, which it's very capable of doing, and lots of people would have seen the Social Dilemma on Netflix, and just be aware now really of how these big tech companies, and I'm happy to name them, you know, Amazon is going to be the go-to location for a lot of people on Black Friday, and they are so good at what they do. I mean, even things like that countdown timer and showing you the number of deals left available. These are all little psychological tricks retailers play, because they test them, they optimize them to work out what makes people buy things, and the more we use them, the better they get at presenting us with stuff we're likely to buy. My Amazon homepage now is just like a treasure trove of temptation, if I can put it that way. I dread to go on there because I know it's going to show me the books I enjoy reading and the technology, the toys I enjoy buying for myself. They know me better than I know myself, and we have to be aware of that, I think, as we head into a Black Friday. I mean, the other thing from a pandemic is that this whole cycle of retail sales promotions have changed. We're not going to get the typical summer sale and the New Year sale anymore, and we probably get the Black Friday sale, to be fair. But I think retailers are having to now compete with the likes of Amazon and other online retailers on different terms. It's not about price discounts anymore. It's about finding unique and interesting stuff to buy. It's about customer service. It's about the experience of shop. And I'm not much of a shopper, but going out and meeting friends when we're allowed to again, and having a coffee and a cake, and that being part of the shopping experience. I think what high streets are going to be about.
I think we've had some depressing moments on this podcast in the last 20 minutes or so, but I do think there is possibly a real upside to this, and maybe out of all this kind of chaos and what we've had, this new life that we've had to adapt to. I'm sure there are parts that, yeah, we can't wait to go out and see our friends again and maybe go to a restaurant or go to the pub or a cafe or something like that. But maybe there are other things that we have found that we would prefer to do differently. And while that might cause some immediate difficulties as we readapt to this new way of life, like exactly the commuting thing, if people don't want to commute into the city 5 days a week, maybe it's okay that life is moving in that direction. Not commuting can, I mean, it doesn't matter for me, but you've got young children. If you had to do a commute into the city every single day, you would get to spend less time with the children. That's an issue.
Where do I sign up, Hannah?
I'm so sorry.
No, you're
spot the wrong way around.
Yeah, you're spot on. Like, I'm mean to my kids, and I'll tell them I said that. You're spot on, and I've in the past, in the recent, as recently as 4 or 5 years ago, had an opportunity to start commuting. And it's a lifestyle choice. For me, I'm very fortunate that I can make that choice and not have to get on a train early in the morning, go up to London with all the other dead-eyed commuters on the train and sort of breathe in the smog and the rest of it. But yeah, if the pandemic experience means that we can pick and choose and hang on to the positive bits, then yeah, that's a good outcome in my mind. I think hopefully a lot of people will think carefully about which bits of the pandemic they've enjoyed, if any, and hang on to those in the future.
Absolutely. I completely agree. It would be a real shame to waste the year and a half or however long we're going to be doing this, and not learn a single thing and make it change anything for the better.
On that note, Hannah, thank you for joining us for this episode of Informed Choice Radio. We'll do this again. If you're listening or watching and you have any feedback, or if you have anything you'd like us to talk about, discuss in the next episode, do get in touch in all the usual ways. You can leave a comment down below or send an email to hello@icfp.co.uk. I'd love to hear from you. Find us on Twitter. I'm at Martin Bamford, and you've probably changed your Twitter name recently, haven't you? Or it may be the same.
I think I'm at Hannah_Godfrey.
That rings a bell.
I think
we'll double check and put it in the description to make sure. But thank you for watching, thank you for listening, and Hannah, thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much.